You so much. It's all Rob. All right. Kicking it off, page 55, and we're at the very bottom paragraph, which turns out it is the fifth paragraph. So when you said that, I was like, oh, amazing. Some of us are doing math. It's not me. All right, page 55, very bottom paragraph. It says, in this book, you will read the experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. Now, this guy, his name is Fitz Mayo, Fitzmayo. And I'm sure Rob's going to put some pictures of him in the chat. And as I always like to joke, what a handsome fella. I always like to do that with any of the co-founders and stuff. I'm like, what a delightful fella. Alrighty. And what's interesting about Fitz Mayo is we're going to read Fitz Mayo's second step experience as we continue on in We Agnostics. But this is not the first time we heard of Fitz Mayo. The first time we heard of Fitz Mayo was at the very, very end of the doctor's opinion. And for those of you who are like, girl, I am just trying to find page 55. Don't try to make me find something in the Roman numerals. That's too much. I'll just summarize. So, but if you're looking for it, you go to page 1. It's right across from, flip it. It's, you know what I mean? You'll find it. But Fitz Mayo. Now, Fitz Mayo was the alcoholic. He was the one who had decided that his situation was hopeless. When we talk about coming to that place of hopelessness, that is that step 1 experience. The reality that I can never ever drink again. And the reality that I cannot stay sober. The reality that I will drink again. And from that place of hopelessness, what Fitz Mayo did was he hid in a deserted barn determined to die. And part of why I love Fitz Mayo is because I had a Fitz Mayo experience. Now, it wasn't a barn. I do live in Alberta, but it wasn't a barn. It was, and it wasn't right behind a dumpster because I was kind of convinced that the garbage truck was going to smush me. And I didn't quite want that. So it was dumpster adjacent. But as we all know, I am a lady. So I was dumpster adjacent, pinkies up. I'm just kidding. It was like minus 30 degrees Celsius and it was terrible. But I had that experience. And he was the first guy in the book that I'm like, hey, I relate. I could see myself in his story. I could see his story in my life. I'm like, yeah, I did that. Now, part of why I love Fitz Mayo, we're going to go on and read on bottom of page 55. But I also had an experience just like Fitz Mayo had that we're going to read. So, in this book, we will read the story of a man who thought he was an atheist. His story is so interesting that some of it should be told now. Now, if you want to read more about Fitz Mayo and you're like, I'm not doing Roman numerals, on page 215 is where we'll see where the story he's telling will line up in the book. And the story he has later on in the book is called Our Southern Friend. Just for any of those that want to make those notes, want to be able to find more about Fitz. And we'll pop over there in a little bit. So it says his change of heart was dramatic, convincing, and moving. And some of y'all know I like my sneakies. I like my sneaky prayers. I like my sneaky promises. And I love my sneaky descriptions of a spiritual awakening. And I don't know if you got color-coordinated highlighters. But if you do, you can highlight, unless you're driving, be safe, Brian, unless you're, but you can highlight, I love the versatility, but you can highlight or make a note that is a sneaky description of a spiritual awakening, that change of heart. That's what's happening. And a change of heart is really describing a transformation from the inside out. And that's what I need. That's not what I thought I needed when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. But that is our solution, a spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening. Top of page 56. And at the very top of page 56, what we're going to look at this paragraph are the barriers, or what seems like the barriers that Fitz Mayo has to the second step. And what we're going to see is that those barriers are real. We're going to, Rob, are you having a hard time putting things in the chat again? Oh no, you got stuff in the chat. You're on it. Sorry, I got real codependent. I'm like, let me fix it. Oh, no worries. All right, so page 56, what we're going to see is that this is the barriers that Fitz Mayo had to a belief in God. to the second step. And what we're going to see is those barriers, while real, while significant, aren't really barriers to the second step. But let's examine those. So it says, our friend was a minister's son. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. And as they say, the technical term is spaghettios. That's what it is. Now, I didn't grow up in any particular religion, but there's that stereotype of ministers' kids where there's that like religion shoved down their throat their whole life, and perhaps some unfair expectations for their children to appear like they're good. So the minister looks like, look, I'm doing it right. My kid's behaving well. And then also what follows is the stereotype that they're little rebels. So he had religion pushed on him from a very young age, and unfair and perhaps unrealistic expectations of a child. And then it says he attended church school where he became rebellious at what he thought an overdose of religious education. So he then goes to a school where, again, it feels like he has religion pushed down his throat again and again and again, and he's just not open. And we talk about how this is a book of mirrors. Has this been my experience? Did I have a higher power that was pushed on me as a child? And in that, was that higher power one that maybe doesn't even resonate with who I am today? Is that our experience? And it says, for years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble and frustration. So for years, he was experiencing these things. And what we're going to read is that these are calamities. And if you're wondering, what does the word calamity mean? It's not the word of the day, but the calamity. A modern word for the word calamity might be trauma. That he experienced some real significant trauma. And here's what it is. For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble and frustration, business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide. And it says these calamities in his immediate family embittered and depressed him. And what I want to point out is that these calamities are real. That's real. Like, this is his immediate family. This isn't like he had a cousin that was having a bad go. In his immediate family, he lost people to suicide. He lost people to fatal illness. He experienced within his immediate family business failure and insanity. Like, that is some heavy stuff. And we can ask ourselves, do I have heavy stuff? Do I have trauma? Do I have some stuff that might make it feel like there is a God that couldn't love me? Is that my experience? It talks about post-war disillusionment. Now, the war that we're talking about is World War I. So post-war is after the First World War, and that disillusionment is what's the point? Now, just to put into some context, World War I was a killing that humanity had not seen at that scale ever before. Hundreds and thousands of lives were lost for a few meters of land at best. And it's these young men that were sent, and like, you'll find small communities in Canada and probably in England and other places in the UK where the entire generation of men were wiped out. It was the first time that chemical warfare was used, and the horrors of things like mustard gas. There was a type of PTSD that they hadn't seen before, and it was referred to as shell shock. And so coming from that sort of environment, and of course mixed with the camaraderie and that, like, having a meaning and a purpose in your life, to coming back to sort of the quote unquote real world, and what was it all for? What was the point? That seeming feeling of meaninglessness. Can I relate to that a little bit? And it talks about ever more serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical collapse, brought him to the point of self-destruction. And so he's got these things which seems like reasonable and fair barriers to belief that there could be a power greater than himself. And he has alcoholism that is bringing him to the end of himself. And as we sort of not alluded to, I just talked about it, that he is coming at this place of coming to the end of himself, that step one experience, that pain, that suffering, and that's actually fertile soil. It doesn't feel like it. It feels incredibly painful and it sucks, is the technical term. The technical term is that it sucks for a real one. But it is when I come to the end of myself, when I see the reality of my predicament as an alcoholic, that becomes fertile soil for that hope to be planted. As we have gone through this book and will continue to go through this book, we see that transition from hopelessness to hope. And so it says, one night, when confined in a hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. So he was approached by an alcoholic, not who told him what to do, had really good ideas, was nagging him, was a real pain in the butt. No, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. Now, I'm going to go on a little etymology tangent. Shocker! And it's not a new one. If you've been hanging out, you're like, oh, girl, I know what's up. I can sense your etymology. It's like my etymology senses, like spider senses. Woo! I apologize for those that are like, I'm not here for etymology. You're getting it. I'm so sorry. So the chapter that we're in, is a chapter called We Agnostics. Not to the agnostic, not the agnostic afterward, not for all y'all agnostics over there. No, it is We Agnostic. Because when we all come to the second step, we all experience some level of agnosticism. Now, in our modern 2026 sort of language, had to check the calendar real quick. I don't know if you caught that. But in our modern 2026 language, agnosticism often sort of means like somebody sitting on the fence. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I'm not sure. But the origin of the word agnostic, it's Greek. And eg means without, and gnosis means knowledge. But I want to point something out. That gnosis is not a head knowledge, not an intellectual knowledge. No, the word gnosis, what it means is spiritual knowledge. It means that heart level experiential knowing. That's what it's talking about. And so, when each and every one of us come to the second step, we all have experienced some level of that I don't have an experience of this power. We all have some agnosticism. And I point out the importance that this is a heart level experiential knowing, not a head level knowing, because we all know what it's like when we're either the sponsee or we're sponsoring others. And the classic, yeah, I know. You know, when your sponsor's telling you something, yeah, I know. And obviously I don't, because I would have followed up with the suggestion. And I have this sponsee. He's a great guy. But the other day he was like, Paige, you know, you keep giving me the same output. You keep telling me to write inventory. And I told him, it's because you keep giving me the same input. You're giving me the same problem and not taking my suggestion. And if you did that, guess what? I'd have more options, you know? And he's like, oh, that's a good point. Yeah, that's fair, you know? But that was, you know, so we're not talking about, yeah, I know, because I don't. We're talking about that experience, that heart level experience of God. So all of us, when we come to the second step, we might have had moments. We might have had those glimmers, but we have not had that heart level, that change of heart, that transformation from the inside out. And in the second step, we're not expected to have it. We're just believing it could be possible. Now, in the 11th step, what we are seeking to do is improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him. By the way, the word understand in my 1930s dictionary, it means to know through experience. This isn't about an idea. This is about an experience. But the word conscience, its etymological origin, I just could have said its language, is Latin. That would have been less of a tongue twister. It's Latin in origin. And con means with. And shas, which is sire, means knowing. So at the second step, we all show up with this, I don't know, like I don't have that heart level experience. But as the result of the 12 steps, what will happen is we will have that heart level experiential knowing. That's what will happen. And so when it says, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. He was approached by an alcoholic who had that experience at a heart level, experiential way. And that is our responsibility. One, so that I can stay sober, but two, so that I can share this message with those who need it most. I also will say, normally I'm not super duper distracted, but Brian got passed by a FedEx truck and I can't stop thinking about it. It's just, it's a little funny. Alrighty. Yeah, I know. Oh, so just the worst. And genuinely, I don't mind if you're doing anything distracted on the screen, but just be forewarned, it might end its way up in the study. Alrighty. So who had known a spiritual experience? Our friend's gorge rose as he bitterly cried out, "If there is a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me." And what I will say is it is fun in modern language to say things like, "My good sir, you have aroused my gorge." And if you're wondering, do I say that in casual conversation? Yep. And I wonder why I'm not invited more places. Yeah. Why don't they want me to come to the party when I'm disinvited? That arouses my gorge. Oh. But he bitterly cries out, "If there's a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me." And we're not dismissing those feelings. Based on what we read on the first paragraph of 56, that makes sense that he would feel that way. And it's also a reminder that I don't need to come to the 12 steps with alacrity. I don't have to be joyful and boisterous and excited about these 12 steps and a God that I don't like. You know what I mean? I don't gotta fake it till I make it, is what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it is okay if I'm not, and I wouldn't be happy, joyous, and free at the second step. Where would I be at the second step? Well, I'd be living on page 52, the bedevilments. I'd be living in that feeling of fear, that feeling of who I am is not enough. I'd be living in that depression, that anxiety, that loneliness. That's where I'm living. So it makes sense that I wouldn't be happy, joyous, and free at the second step. And it says, but later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question. Now, this is a powerful question. Is it possible? All the religious people I have known are wrong. And I'm going to give you this because it's going to be really helpful for when you work with others. The phrase, "is it possible," is powerful. Put that in your pocket. Is it possible? Would you consider? When I did Steel on Steel, and Steel on Steel is a spiritual exercise that was created by a well-known AA speaker who has since passed on. His name was Mark Houston. And we would get together once a month and we would share honestly about the struggles living a spiritual way of life, these 12 steps. And we would hold each other accountable and we would offer considerations, but always in the form of, is it possible and would you consider? And that begins to make those, yeah, and just write it down too. Yeah, poor Eileen knows when I'm working with sponsees. Because, by the way, this is a tangent. You'll be shocked that I work with people who are equally as all over the place. And they'll be like, tell me a story. I'm like, write that down. Put that down for inventory. Yeah, write that down. Very helpful. But what I will say is when we're offering things to our sponsees, is it possible? Would you consider? It makes it palatable. It makes it things that we can hear, and it lowers the defenses. And I always want to be useful. I always want to be helpful, and I always want to communicate in a way in which I can be heard. The exception is, I've been told many times, talk slower, and I try. I'm trying. It's like, we can't understand your accent. I'm trying to go slower. This is the best I got. I'm so sorry. So is it possible? All the religious people I have known are wrong. And if you are feeling this, man, I don't know if there could be a power greater than myself. I feel like I've been so hurt and hard done by, or I feel like I got all these barriers. What we could ask ourselves, if you don't want to ask, is it possible all the religious people I've known are wrong? We can ask ourselves, is it possible that all the people who have recovered in Alcoholics Anonymous, is it possible that they are wrong? And again, I want to talk about what it means to be recovered, because recovered means that we have had this transformation as the result of the 12 steps, that we're continuing to live this way of life. Because I think we all know what it's like to have an old timer. Like I sort of visualize it, the old timer at the in-person meetings who has their own chair, and they still lament about how, like, we can't smoke in meetings anymore, and how do you stay sober without ashtrays to clean? A rigorous program of action is outlined in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, that's also known as the 12 steps. That's how we recover, by the way. But you know that one that, like, you don't have a cigarette next to them because you're worried they're going to go up like forest fire? Like, oh my gosh, Smokey the Bear. You know, he warned us about smoking near, not literally, but we have no opinion on wildfires. But Smokey the Bear, he was warning us about, like, smoking next to people who are not spiritually well. They're dry, you know. But is it possible that all the people who have recovered are wrong? All those people who have the light on in their eye, the hope in their spirit, they do have problems, but they seem to be able to move through those problems. They're kind, they're compassionate, they're loving, they're honest. Like, those people, is it possible that all those people are wrong? And it says, while pondering the answer, he felt as though he lived in hell. Now, I'm not going to speak about hell in a theological sense, but I'll tell you about my experience with hell. My experience with hell was the here and now. My experience with hell was not a geographic location. Although sometimes in the winter, and when Rob and Chris are getting all the snow, they're like, I just shoveled 5 minutes ago. I think I'm there. But for me, hell was not a geographic location. Hell was the here and now. Hell was how I was living my life. Hell was every morning when I would wake up, or more accurately come to, and not wanting to face the day. That was my hell. And if you're wondering, where is heaven? And again, I can't speak to theology and I cannot speak to a geographic location, but what I can tell you is that heaven can and is. It can be the here and now. It can be this moment. It can be this experience, to experience heaven in the here and now. And that is where God is, the here and now. Often we see this power in the rear view mirror. That's where we start. But we begin to experience and to see this power working in the here and now. So while pondering the answer, he felt as though he lived in hell. And isn't it interesting that we always start with hopelessness? And that's when we experience the hope. Spoilers, there's going to be some hope over here. So it says, then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came. It crowded out all else. Who are you to say there is no God? And I'll talk about this. Who are you to say there is no God? That was a thought that cut out all other thoughts. And I'll read the next paragraph, and we'll talk about this experience, and I'll share a similar one. But it says, this man recounts that he tumbled out of bed to his knees. Like, this was not just, hey, who am I to say that there's no God? You know? No, this is a thought that is not his thought, that overcomes his thinking. And it is so powerful that he tumbles to his knees. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed by a conviction of the capital P, capital G, the presence of God. It poured over and through him with the certainty and majesty of a great tide at flood. And so what is happening is that those barriers are being swept away. In fact, it goes on to say the barriers he had built through the years were swept away. So what are the barriers? The barriers are what we see at the top of page 56. Those are the barriers to belief in God. We can think about our own barriers, the barriers that we have, that I had these terrible things happen to me. That's real. I can't figure out God in my head. I haven't had a spiritual experience. I'm not supposed to figure out God in my head. And I'm not going to have one at step 2. He's going to have one in step 2, but most of us aren't going to have one at step 2. The barriers of the pain and the suffering and the ego and all of that gets swept away like a great tide at flood. And it's like a petard that is like blown up, and it blows away all these barriers. Or actually, if you lived in Calgary in 2013, here's the tie-in. If you lived in Calgary in 2013, we had a significant flood. And if you've ever seen like a flood, it just takes everything with it with complete abandon. It's gone. It sweeps it away. So those are the barriers that were swept away. And because I'm off on that tangent, we're going. So it was actually the flood in 2013 when I started smoking, because I was Little Miss spiritually well, so I picked up the cigarettes. And you'll be shocked to know I got hooked on those right away. Now, I'm going to tell this story. This is a story about the power of God. I don't care if you smoke. I genuinely am not taking an opinion. Alcoholics Anonymous, we don't care about your nicotine consumption. And hey, if you're going to an in-person meeting and you're having a hard time finding the place, you just find a group of people smoking and chugging coffee outside a church at 8 p.m. You'll find it, I am not judging that. So I want to be very clear. But I want to tell you this story because it's part of why I love Fitz Mayo. Because just as much as I have that experience of hidden in a deserted barn, determined to die, I've had a Fitz Mayo experience. And a lot of times when we read through this part of the book and share about it at meetings, or we read through Bill Wilson's spiritual experience and we talk about it at meetings, what is the common thing we hear? Oh no. You can't expect to have a spiritual experience like that. The best we can hope for is the educational variety. I don't know anyone who's had an experience like that. Just maybe one day at a time. After not drinking for 40 years, you can maybe be happy, joyous, and free. I've lost my tail. I'm channeling my inner Eeyore. And we hear that. And what I want to say is one of my favorite sentences in the big book: nonsense. Nonsense. That's not true. And that is not our lived experience. Often what happens is we come and guess what we don't do? The course of action that brings about the spiritual awakening. But also what happens is we take our time and we don't go through it quickly, and we sort of avoid that process. So if I want the effects, and we have powerful effects. And what do I always say? Well, a lot. And some of you are like, you're on like 36 out of like 34 tangents, girl. We don't know what you always say. But what I always like to talk about is the idea that I could not stay well on one drink. I cannot stay well on one spiritual experience. So if I've not had a powerful spiritual experience, man, lean in. We get to have them. And the spiritual experience that I have is absolutely none of my business. And so what happened was, this was like right before COVID. So I guess 2020. I'm bad with time orientation. We got to have like a big event for me to be like, figure out when that was happening. So what happened was, every year I like to do like a religious holiday. I'm not particularly religious. I just like to borrow from a variety of faith traditions, because in step 11 it says, be quick to see religious people aright, make use of what they have to offer. And I take that and I have fun with it. Like I go. But I don't do the fun ones, not the ones with the lights and the colors and the food. I'm like, let me give things up. And there's one where it's like you give up something, and I like to look at giving up. What do I turn to instead of God? And then I like to, and the part of the process is add something to that prayer and meditation life. So it makes sense if I'm giving up something I turn to instead of God. I need more of that connection. I need more of that power in my life. So I add something to my prayer life or my meditation life. And then the third thing is I find another way to be of service, which, as I think we all know, is that's such a big part of this, helping others and getting outside of ourselves. And so I remember it was this one year, and I was real excited. I knew what I wanted to add to my prayer life. I knew what I wanted to add to my meditation, my prayer life, my meditation life, and I knew what I wanted to do to be of service. But I didn't know what I wanted to give up. Now, at this point, I had switched from vaping, from cigarettes to vaping, because I like it when my nicotine can taste like candy, because I'm an adult. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, it's delicious, you know? And so what do we do? So I was vaping, and what happened was I asked some sponsees, and I was like, what do you think I should give up for this, holiday or whatever? And they're like, why don't you give up vaping? And I said, are you out of your mind? And I didn't actually say that, but listen, I don't rank my sponsees, but if I did, you'd be right at the bottom. Absolutely not. You're out of your mind. And then what I did was I came to do two-way prayer. And two-way prayer was a meditative practice that was in fact, it was almost synonymous with the Oxford group. And in the practice of two-way prayer, what you do is you ask a question. And the question that I asked was, what should I give up for this holiday? And then what you do is you read out of some spiritual literature. It doesn't matter if it's a book of religion or a Hallmark card. You read out of some spiritual literature. And then you come to a place of quiet and stillness and meditation. And then after a period of that, you write. And you write whatever comes to mind. Always starting with a term of endearment, like my dear, my love, my child, my beloved, something like that. And if you get stuck, you just start with another term of endearment and go again. You do that for like 5 minutes. And then the next 5 minutes, what you do is you sit in the presence of God. You sit in the presence of that power. And so that was the process that I did. And I'm not sure it even had this moment, this experience that I had. I'm not sure it even happened during the writing portion. In fact, I'm fairly certain it happened during the sitting in God's presence. But what came to me was a thought, a voice that was not my voice, that crowded out all other voices. A thought that crowded out all other thoughts. And it was, how big is your God? And what came beneath that was a knowing. And that knowing was, you either trust me or you don't. And you're asking these sponsees to take a leap of faith. I need you to take one too. And that was the start of my Fitz Mayo experience. I've had that experience. And like a good little alky, I'm like, alrighty, okay. It's not usually that clear, so I will do that. And leading up, I'm like, all right, that's it. I'm giving up vaping. I'm doing this thing. And I started to be able to work with people more intensively. And we were meeting every day. And this was pre-COVID. So I was meeting people in a coffee shop. And then we'd be back to back to back. And I wouldn't be able to sneak out and get my little vapey. And so I'm like, my nicotine level's going lower. Again, I don't care if you smoke. I don't care if you vape. I don't have an opinion. But I was like, my nicotine level's going lower. It's meant to be. And the day before, it was a Tuesday, and I'm like, I have made a terrible mistake. Absolutely not. What am I thinking? I'm not going to give up nicotine. I'll pick something else. I don't know. And so I went down to the coffee shop, and I met a sponsee, and I received that sponsee's fifth step, and I had another sponsee that came right after to meet. And we go outside, and we go to have a smoke. And as we're chit-chatting, I didn't even get a good haul on my vape. But what happened is as we were chit-chatting and I vaping and they were smoking, is what happened is the lanyard that I had on my vape, it caught on the brake of my wheelchair, and that vape smashed to the ground. And I haven't had any nicotine since. And if y'all knew me when I was smoking, you would have been like, yeah, that is not me. My sponsor at the time, she said, Paige, I've never seen anyone vape as much as you. I didn't say this, but I did think it. Girl, get to some more meetings. But like, I promise, if I was still vaping, you wouldn't know what I looked like, because it would be a white cloud. You know what I mean? Because it was like every inhale was a haul on that bad boy. Again, I don't care what you're doing, but that is just an example of this power doing for me what I could not do for myself. And all I had to do was put myself in the position. And that's what this whole thing is about. I put myself in a position to receive that grace. So please do not let anyone tell you the best we could hope for is the educational variety. Because absolutely not. Absolutely not. We do have powerful, real, meaningful, significant spiritual experiences, and I can't stay well on one. I've got to keep seeking them.
And so Fitz Mayo, when it says the barriers he had built through the years were swept away, he stood in the capital P, capital I, capital P, capital L, the presence of infinite power and love. Infinite power and love. And I point out, by the way, if you're not sure, I know a lot of you know, girl, we know why you capitalize in these things. But if you're not sure, why am I emphasizing the capitalizations? The reason I am emphasizing the capitalizations is because those are words that we could use instead of the word God. Or these are words that are pointing to the power that we are after. That's what we're talking about. And I love the idea of presence of infinite power and love. This presence, this present tense verb that is moving and active in my life. And it is infinite power and love. And in this first step, I just admitted I don't have any power. I am powerless. And what I need is power. And I like to describe it as a relationship with power, because I need to build it. I need to deepen it. And the more that I do, the more that we experience and love. How beautiful it is to be able to grasp, to touch on the infinite of love. How powerful. And listen, I was not radiating that when I got here. That's for sure. I was not happy, joyous, and free. And it says he had stepped from bridge to shore. Now, this is referencing what we were talking about on page 53. When it said God is everything or else God is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What is our choice to be? And we're going to talk about this a little bit more. That is step 2, part 2. How we summarize it. And don't worry, I'll summarize step 2 as we go on. But how we summarize it is this power capable of removing the obsession that I have to drink? And in this moment, he has a spiritual experience. And I'm going to point something out, is if he did not continue to work with others, he would not have stayed sober. I cannot stay well on one spiritual experience. Actually, Mary was the one that pointed this out to me in Varieties of Religious Experience. It's the only book that's directly referenced in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And in it, it talks about how backsliding is common. I think that's the word they use, but it's common to have a spiritual experience and be like, why, yes, I would like to rest on those laurels. I don't need to do anything more. And to experience a bit of a regression. And we don't have that luxury. We need to continue to grow and to seek. But the more we do, the more powerful and profound it is. I'm just going to share my dear friend Terry. He talks about how we grow at the rate of pain. And that is true when we first get here, but it does not need to remain true. If I continue to seek, I don't have to grow at the pace of pain. I can grow at the rate of desire, because I want to know more. I want to experience more. I want, I get to be led by this power rather than have my butt kicked by my selfishness and self-centeredness and be like, that hurts a whole lot. I got to take some action, So when it says he stepped from bridge to shore, what we're saying is he was able to take that leap from reason to faith. And again, faith is not certainty. Faith is an open hand, willing to grasp the real, willing to grasp a new experience. And it says for the first time he lived in, and here's that word, conscious companionship with his creator. Conscious, the Latin con, with, shus, knowing. He had that heart level knowing. And I love that it says companionship. Just as we read last week, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Conscious companionship with his creator. Thus was our friend's cornerstone fixed in place. So the cornerstone is step 2, part 2. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, hold on, step 2, part 1, sorry. I'm going to screen share. Boop, there it goes. It's a little shaky. So step 2, part 1. This is the cornerstone. And we're going to see that he took he took the second step, and we're going to see how he did that. So step 2, part 1.
It's on page 47. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe that there is a capital P power that is greater than myself? Could there be a power that is greater than me? And he was able to say yes, because that power came and said, who are you to say there is no God? And he experienced that flow, that tide, that infinite power and love, that certainty and majesty that flowed through him. He was able to experience that. So that is his cornerstone, that there could be a power because he had that experience of that power. We don't have to start with an experience. We will get the experience. We will get it as we take the course of action that is the 12 steps. But we start with maybe there could be a power. Maybe Fitz Mayo wasn't blowing smoke where the sun doesn't shine. You know what I mean? So that's the cornerstone. And it says no later vicissitude has shaken it. Vicissitude is trouble, problem, worry, struggle, life on life's terms. No later trouble, worry, life on life's terms has shaken it. And then it says his alcoholic problem was taken away. That very night it disappeared. So what it's saying is the obsession of the mind was taken away. It disappeared. And it says, save for a few brief moments of temptation, the thought of drink has never returned. At such times, a great revulsion has risen up in him. Seemingly, he could not drink, even if he would. God had restored his sanity. And from that very night years ago to God has restored his sanity, what it is describing is step 2, part 2. Do I believe that this power could relieve from me the thought that I have when I am sober that tells me I can drink again, that tells me I can go back to it again and again and again, despite the fact that it is ruining my life? And he's able to take the second, so he's able to take the first part of step 2, because it's like God comes down and says, who are you to say there is no God? And he's able to take the second part of step 2 because the obsession of the mind is removed in that moment. And that's about, for us, we just need to start with, there could be a power, and that power could restore me to sanity. And when we talk about sanity in Alcoholics Anonymous, the only sanity that we are specifically referring to is the obsession of the mind being removed. That's what we are focusing on. If that is removed, and I promise, when that is removed as the result of these 12 steps, everything else falls into place. Because we're treating at root the spiritual malady with these steps, but that's what it's talking about. He could not drink even if he would. It's gone from him. And that's Fitz Mayo. And so one of the things that I want to do, because I love my sneaky prayers, I love my sneaky promises, and I love my sneaky descriptions of a spiritual awakening. So let's go and let's pop over to page 215. Now, we're not going to do too much over at 215. We're not going to read the whole story or anything like that. But I just want to point out a sneaky little prayer on page 215. And if you have a look, it's 215, and there's a point where it says, yes, I reply, where it gets a little narrow. And the following paragraph is what we're looking for. So 215, and your eyes will be drawn to yes, I reply. And then we go after that. That isn't the way, he continued. The thing I do is to say. Oh, and by the way, if you're in the 3rd edition, I don't know if we have any 3rd editions, but it's page 504 if you're in the 3rd edition. I just had that note and I was like, oh, if we got any 3rd edition homies, I got you, Wendy. We got this. Alrighty. So it says, that isn't the way, he continued. The thing I do is to say, and you can make a little note, and I call it this, the Fitz Mayo prayer. I call it the Fitz Mayo prayer. You don't have to, but it's a beautiful 3rd step prayer. The thing I do is to say, God, here I am, and here are all my troubles. I've made a mess of things and can't do anything about it. You take me and all my troubles and do anything you want with me. So if you're looking for an extra prayer or an additional prayer, there it is. It's a beautiful prayer to say. So let's pop over back to page 57. And it says, what is this but a miracle of healing? And keep in mind, when we talk about miracles, I believe in miracles because I see the miraculous before my very eyes. I see alcoholics who are hopeless. To have alcoholism is to be doomed to drink again. But to be able to be recovered, that is a miracle. The natural state of an alcoholic is drunk or about to drink again, and there is no human power that can stop us. And to have that gone, to be removed, that is a miracle of healing. Yet its elements are simple. So the elements to get to that miracle of healing is the same for each and every one of us. Circumstances made him willing to believe. What were the circumstances? The first circumstance was what I was alluding to in the doctor's opinion. He had come to the end of himself. He was at the end of his rope. He was beaten and he was broken and he was hopeless. And what before him was a recovered alcoholic, or an alcoholic who had had a spiritual experience, who said that it was possible, and that planted the seed. It said he humbly offered himself to his maker. And how we do that is we make the third step decision and we follow it up with the actions of all 12 steps. That's how we offer ourselves to our capital M maker. And I will say, maker, if you don't like that as a word for God, you don't have to use it. But when I think of things in my life that I made, other than a mess of my life, or things in my life that I created, to me it implies to be made with love and care and attention. And that's not how I was showing up. That's not how I thought I was. I thought I was the biggest piece of garbage that ever lived. And it says, even so has God restored us all to our right minds. So we have all, each and every one of the first 180 members have been restored. But each and every one of us who has taken this course of action that is outlined in this book, we have had an experience, a spiritual awakening. The obsession is gone. That is what is promised to us. And it's saying this is not an idea. This is not a theory. This is our lived experience. To this man, the revelation was sudden. Yes, it was. Some of us grow into it more slowly. And how we grow into it more slowly is at the rate at which I am willing to work these 12 steps. That's how we grow into it more slowly. Not take a step a year or take a year to work the steps. No, we go over it quickly, through it, like dive in. But here, these last two sentences are the last two promises of step 2. But he has come, so if you got your promises highlighter, you can highlight. But he has come to all who have honestly sought him. That's a promise. And if you're here today and it's like, how do I seek God? Do I got to go to the local bookstore and get some stuff in the New Age section? Only if you want to. How we seek God is the 12 steps is outlined in this book. That's how we do it. So God will come if I am willing to take this course of action. And here's the promise, another promise. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. So when we draw close to God, again, how do I draw close to this power? That is the purpose of the 12 steps. And when I do that, God discloses himself to us. We begin to have a spiritual experience. So at step 2, we just got to start with maybe there could be a power. Maybe that power could bring about a spiritual awakening. And then next week, we're going to dive into how it works and see how do we get that spiritual awakening. Spoilers, the 12 steps. Over to you, Peppa.